Iran trumps Trump in new art of the deal. And before we carry on, we must point out that we, wearing our FOI hats, had the FOI Geopolitical Risk Monitor in May 2026. And we had another briefing on the US-Israel-Iran war. And our managing partner, Sanjay Acharya, who put in endless sleepless nights, produced a rather polished finished product that has been much appreciated. And pretty much the war has unfolded exactly as we predicted. Now that we have blown our own horn, we can carry on with our analysis. Over to you, Glenn. What's going on? Why is it important? Why should we dance in our grass skirts celebrating victory? Or why we should worry that the sky will fall on our heads? Or why maybe we should just shrug our shoulders and carry on? Over to you.
Well, it's awkward to be a triumphalist amidst catastrophe, but that's sort of where we are. So, what's happened in the U.S.-Iran war? I'll call it. There is some sort of an agreement percolating, cautiously showing its head, and immediately having the part of the head that is shown cut off, and then hesitation as to whether there is an agreement and so on. But there fundamentally has been a cessation of the fighting. And the regular violations of the ceasefire by both parties really have been parts of the negotiating process. I'm not being facetious in the least. So we now have something called the U.S.-Iran Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding. What does it mean? What are the consequences of this understanding? Washington has agreed, Donald Trump has agreed to lift the American blockade on the Iranians in the Straits of Hormuz. Washington will pull back its naval forces within 30 days, but 30 days from when remains a little fuzzy. Washington ends sanctions on Iranian petrochemicals and oil sales, which really means sales of petrochemicals and oil to China and elsewhere. They now become possible. This is a dramatic shift from the circumstances for many years prior to the outbreak of hostilities about 4 months ago. Washington pledges, this is hard even to imagine that Washington is pledging this, but it really is Donald Trump. Washington pledges to prepare, quote, an international reconstruction fund of $300 billion, that's B like a boy, $300 billion for the wayward international terrorist state Iran. For its part, Iran has offered a 60-day pause in hostilities. And if all of these wonderful terms that I just iterated from the American side are not fulfilled, then the 60-day pause need no longer be respected. Iran offers a, quote, temporary, unquote, 60-day agreement to allow commercial vessels to transit the strait without charge. And then Iran will, quote, maintain the status quo on its nuclear program while talks continue, which means while Iran verifies that the United States carries out its side of the agreement. And then Iran insists, this is all in the Memorandum of Understanding, that Israel desist from and stop its attacks on Hezbollah in Lebanon. And de facto, the United States has pressured Israel to adhere to this element of the agreement because Israeli attacks on Hezbollah were stopping the Iranians from agreeing to the Memorandum of Understanding, to the peace agreement, as I just laid it out. Now, what were Trump's war aims? Why did all of this start? Well, they were incoherent, ad hoc, and constantly changing, but they seem to have several elements that were ideals and serious, I guess. eliminating Iran's nuclear program. That has been the leitmotif of all countries' policies towards Iran for decades. That was the sine qua non of the American objectives. What has been the result? The current future, as I just described it, is a clear regression from the JCPOA agreement that Obama and the Iranians negotiated and that Donald Trump withdrew from on his first day in office in 2016. So the Iranian nuclear program is less constrained than it has been in decades. The United States was seeking to overthrow the Iranian regime, the Mullah regime. What is the result? In fact, we have a more hardline series of rulers in place who are more securely in power than they were antebellum. The Iranian Revolutionary Guards have for years been the de facto string pullers in the Iranian system, and now they don't have to pull the strings. They have their hands on the levers. They run the state. The mullahs now serve the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. It has become a militarized state. Since the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards are fundamentally a military organization at this point. Another objective of the United States was to degrade Iran's conventional military capabilities, notably its missile capabilities and stockpiles. What has been the result? The conventional capabilities were always of Iran, have been for many years largely toothless, incapable of projecting power beyond Iran's borders in a conventional sense, except for missiles and surrogates. What is the result? The conventional forces have been decimated, but they were incapable of projecting power beforehand. So, touted as a great success, this really doesn't add up to too much of anything and change the status quo in that regard that had existed before. The missile capabilities have been degraded, but now the intelligence community of the United States assesses that 70% of the Iranian capabilities from before the war remain operational. And the Iranians continue to demonstrate that they can, at a lesser degree, strike anywhere and anyone in the Middle East if they wish. And thus, even the threat of these missiles is a de facto destabilizing element that the Iranians can brandish still. And then the objective that was not an objective, the reality that emerged, is the new reality of warfare, and that is drones. They were not mentioned, and now drones define war making and the war space worldwide. We see this in Ukraine, see it in the Straits of Hormuz, and asymmetric warfare has been a concern of American military strategists and large military organizations' concerns for decades. Asymmetric meant a terrorist in the mountains for years. Now it means drones. A $500 drone can destroy, and does routinely, a $20 million tank. A $50,000 missile or series of drones can destroy a $12 billion aircraft carrier. So for major powers, the consequences of the war, major military powers, are earth-changing, which is directly relevant to Russia as they've been experienced in Ukraine, to the United States as it has just experienced in the Straits of Hormuz, and to China as it contemplates absorbing Taiwan. And I would argue the next one would be Turkey, which is seeking to project its powers in some ways too. I wouldn't include India. India is less expansionist, but certainly this is relevant for all countries with military issues that they need to worry about.
Glenn, if I can very quickly,
please,
if I can very quickly add to your point, Iran has really focused on asymmetric warfare. They have done rather well. They have used drones brilliantly. They have used their missiles well. They have battered American bases. They have also hit oil refineries, gas plants, aluminium, And today morning, I was speaking to someone who has lived all over the Middle East, speaks Arabic and Farsi, has detailed knowledge of the Middle East. And he pointed out that at the end of the day, Iran is a really difficult country to invade. So invasion is not on the table because you've got the Elburz Mountains and then you've got the Zagros Mountains. And, the joke that Iran is a Persian cat, it's on the map, it's sort of shaped like a cat. Because Iran is difficult to invade, unlike, say, Iraq, you can even if you destroy conventional forces, doesn't mean your troops can move in. Guerrilla war would be very painful for any invading force, and more importantly, because it has so many mountains, when it comes to critical weaponry, nuclear stuff, missiles, drone manufacturing, you name it, they can very quickly, very easily, not very easily, but very quickly use geography to their advantage and keep the critical bits of their arsenal, keep the critical bits of their weaponry safe. And so with their use of asymmetric warfare at the Strait of Hormuz, which they've blocked, and with the use of their proxies, the Shia Hezbollah in Lebanon, and Shias, you've served in Lebanon, you know Lebanon well. The Shias had a sense of burning resentment because they were the underclass, and they are maniacal and fanatical in their support for Hezbollah. And Hezbollah is a formidable fighting unit. And the Houthis, who are also not to be underestimated, because they have stood up to both the UAE and the Saudis who've tried to crush them. So using these relatively cheap asymmetric weapons and forces, Iran has brought the entire region to a standstill, and the Strait of Hormuz, offers a fantastic choke point to hold the world to ransom. 20%, over 20% of the world's oil and gas passes through that. Over a third of the world's fertilizers passes through that strait. Aluminium, so many other things which we've covered in great detail go through that. And this means that Iran can exert an can give an inflationary shock that comes and hits all the way to US domestic market. Anybody buying eggs, anybody buying bread in even a US supermarket will feel the pinch. Forget about the other more vulnerable countries, unless we forget the 1973 oil shock, and the 1979 oil shock were partly because of Iran, and the 1970s led to stagflation. So I have said repeatedly that the 2026 Hormuz crisis is for the US what the 1956 Suez crisis was for the UK. Over to you, Glenn.
I don't think it's quite as I wouldn't go that far. I wouldn't characterize it as an empire-ending event, but it is certainly I certainly agree that it indicates a lasting shift in American power, or in great power, ability to project influence and power. It's historic. Certainly, I certainly agree with that. The last thing, the last objective that the United States and Israel sought to achieve in the war was to stop Iran's support for its regional surrogates, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthi, and Shia groups in Iraq. And what's the result? The surrogates are weaker, substantially weaker. The Houthis perhaps not. But that's not from the American-Israeli attack on Iran. That's from the Israeli attack against Hamas and then Hezbollah. Now, I said explicitly, as did others, of course, right at the beginning of Israel's counterattack, to be accurate, against Hamas 3 years ago, that it was impossible to destroy Hamas, that a conventional military cannot destroy a movement. It's not an organization. It is an ideology and a movement. And that has been proven correct. And something to a point that you made, Atul, and relevant to the one I just made about the surrogates. It's true that the British won most major battles, not all, against the Americans. And their conventional military was the finest in the world at the time. And the Americans were militiamen, mostly. I'm simplifying. But there are two differences in the situations for the belligerent parties. For the Americans, the issue was existential. For the British, it was something they wanted to do, to recontrol the colonies. For the Americans, so long as they continued to exist and had somewhere they could go, they could not be defeated. And therefore, the British lost. What was the American experience in Vietnam? It was identical. Can the Americans invade Iran and win every battle? I think unquestionably, yes. But are the Americans willing to pay, and not just Donald Trump, would the Americans be willing to pay the guaranteed large number of sustained, continuing casualties, meaning deaths of Americans? And the answer to that is no. For what, would be the thought. And what is the issue for the Iranian Revolutionary Guards? It's existential. And they have, as Atul pointed out well, many places to go. So the dilemma is almost insoluble from the American perspective. And the result actually is that the surrogates are weaker, but they remain. So short, medium term, there has been a shift in the battlefield space security and state security as a result of the weakening of surrogates by Israel. But that does not change the structural nature of the hostility of the groups and the reason that they exist and the fact that they continue to exist. Now, just I'll finish to be quick because there's another subject to discuss. All of these are very important conclusions and consequences of America's failure and defeat in attacking Iran. But there are strategic implications that are even broader. Iran will be, so long as the regime lasts, and a strong regime, which is totalitarian, can be brittle too, but I'm not predicting its decline, but that could happen because most Iranians loathe the Revolutionary Guards. So for now, Iran is stronger than it was before. Israel is tactically and operationally safer for the medium term, which would be a number of years. Long term, worse off because, as Israeli politicians point out themselves, Israel has turned the attitudes of its supporters in the world to now critics, as we found in the elections that Atul talked about here in New York last night. Then the U.S. and great powers, as I said, have to confront that there's an equalization of the battle space, and hegemony is more elusive than ever, and we are in a far more unstable world. And on that, we could go on, but it's the war has ramifications. The U.S. attack on Iran has ramifications far beyond anything that's ever entered Donald Trump's head.
I'll just add the domestic aspect to it. You've already said Iran is ascendant right now. The regime has survived. It controls the Strait of Hormuz. But in the US, there is now an air of political crisis. Why do I say so? I say so because the Republican-controlled US Senate has passed a measure demanding that President Donald Trump halt the war or seek congressional approval before continuing military action. The House of Representatives passed the same measure earlier this month. Note, this is the first time that both the House and the Senate have passed a concurrent resolution instructing a president to end military action since the War Powers Resolution of 1973 was enacted. So this is also a very significant element. The fact that Republicans are turning against Donald Trump, note that the Senate is controlled by the Republicans, is immense. And they are not going against Donald Trump just for kicks. They are going against Donald Trump because their constituents are saying, hang on a minute, this was supposed to be over very quickly, like Venezuela. We don't want to pay the cost in blood and treasure. We have plenty of problems at home. 37% of us cannot afford $400 from cash or savings. So why the hell are we spending money like water on a conflict in foreign lands precisely when you came to power, promising that you wouldn't get into foreign misadventures? So the domestic element is extremely important. And I always point out all politics is fundamentally local. And America lacks the will, lacks the stomach for the fight. There aren't anti-war demonstrations as in the days of Vietnam, but the tide has turned. The tide of public opinion is firmly against the war.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.